Hi, and thank you for joining us on our What to Do During a Traffic Stop session. Our presenters for today are Sergeants Brian Miller and Mo Greenberg from Baltimore County Police and Officers Laurie Reyes and Tara Bond with Montgomery County Police. And I'm Shelley McLaughlin with Pathfinders for Autism. So everyone feels anxiety when they see a police car behind them with lights and sirens, and we all start to wonder, am I in trouble? Did I do something wrong? And in that moment, when you're nervous, it can make slowing down your brain to think about what you need to do really hard. Sometimes you've done nothing wrong, and it may just be that the police are pulling you over to let you know that you have a tail light out. So it's really time to start thinking about what you should do during a traffic stop before you get pulled over. The goal is to have a safe interaction during the traffic stop.
Thanks, Shelley. And so we're going to hear a couple themes throughout this presentation today, one of which is safety. And that's safety for the police officers, safety for you, and safety for other people traveling on the roadway. The other theme that you're going to hear throughout this presentation is your need to share your diagnosis if you're comfortable. And you're going to hear us talk about that a little bit. Two important things that will weave themselves throughout this presentation. So one of the first things we want you to do, if you should see the lights or hear the siren from a police car behind you, is to pull over safely. Again, safety is what matters here. So the best way to sort of acknowledge to the police officer that you have seen the fact that the lights are on behind you and that they're interested in pulling you over is to turn on your turn signal. That not only lets the police officer know that you've seen them, it also lets any other drivers know your intention at this point to pull over. We ask you to try to pull over to the right side of the road if it's at all possible, but take your time with this. There's no need to rush. The officer understands that it's not always immediately feasible for you to just pull over. So the other thing that we want you to do is to find a safe place to pull over. So slowly pull over to the safest spot on the side of the road that you can find. You might pull over onto the shoulder of the road. You might pull alongside of a curb. If there's no shoulder, you could use a parking lot. Sometimes people even pull into someone's driveway. The point is, again, road safety. And as you can see in this picture, this car that stopped has pulled off out of the travel lane onto the shoulder of the road because there's a shoulder for the driver to utilize. So take your time, don't feel rushed, and pull over safely where you feel comfortable doing so. Now, sometimes this is easier said than done. Sometimes traffic is rather heavy, and it's not always easy for you to find a safe place to pull over. When you find yourself in that situation, it's okay for you to stop in the travel lane that you're in if you feel it's safe to do so. So if this is what you're going to do, just be aware of your surroundings. Be aware of the traffic around you. Be aware of what's happening. Again, signaling to the officer in some way, shape, or form that you see them and recognize that they're behind you and that you need to stop for them. You could use your turn signal. You could use your emergency flashers. You could just put your hand up and wave to the officer through so that they can see you through the rear windshield. But it's important that we, again, focus on safety. And sometimes you just have to stop where you are. Now, if that's the case, the officer will approach your car. The officer may approach you from the driver's side or passenger side, which we'll talk about in a minute. But wherever they approach you, The officer will introduce themselves, usually explain to you why it is that you've been stopped, and usually ask for your driver's license, your vehicle registration, and insurance information. When that occurs, you can ask the officer, is it okay for me to stop where I'm stopped? And then if the officer says it's okay and he or she intends to conduct the traffic stop right where you are, stay where you are. The officer may recognize the fact that this isn't the best place for you to for them to conduct this traffic stop, or for you to be stopped where you are. So they may advise you where to go at that point. They may say, go up a couple blocks and you can pull into a Chick-fil-A parking lot, or go up a couple blocks and the road then does have a shoulder for you to pull onto. In any case, follow the officer's instructions. Now, sometimes when you're stopped in a busy roadway, there's a lot of road noise. For the officer, it can be difficult for them to hear what you're saying, but more importantly for you, it can be very difficult for you to hear what the officer's saying. If you don't hear what the officer has instructed, ask. If you don't understand what the officer has instructed you to do, ask. The officer has no problem repeating themselves so that you understand whatever it is that they'd like you to do. So anything you don't understand at any time during a traffic stop, be sure that you ask.
Now, I mentioned before that we all feel anxious when we're being pulled over. And sometimes it's really hard to remember what to do when you're feeling stressed. So as part of our traffic stop toolkit that we have available, we have this laminated visor card. And so you can clip this card to your visor so that you can easily flip the visor down as you're getting pulled over, to remind you of the top instructions that you need to follow. Keep in mind, another reason that we've created this card is because we do not want you reaching into the glove box or the console until an officer asks you to do so. So this way you have the information right there in front of you instead of being in the glove box.
So really important instructions here for you. Keeping your hands on the steering wheel is, or just visible, is really, really important to a police officer. Traffic stops are the #1 way in which police officers are injured or killed in the line of duty. So police officers take them very seriously, and we don't know who the driver of the car is that we're stopping. So we want to, for our safety and for your safety, make sure that we can see your hands. That is what makes an officer feel most comfortable, is when they can see your hands. So keeping them on the steering wheel is a great place to keep them highly visible for the police officer. The other thing is, don't get out of your car unless the officer asks you to do so. Otherwise, stay in your car. Again, safety is important. We don't want you to step out of the car and be hit by an oncoming car, or again, for the officer to misinterpret your actions. So just remain in your car. If you have a need for the officer's attention, you can just put your hand out and keep waving until the officer acknowledges or comes back to your car, and get the officer's attention that way. You don't have to get out of your car to ask additional questions. Just flag the officer and they'll come back to you if they're in their patrol car. This instruction is what I mentioned before, and that's tell the officer about your diagnosis. This is really helpful in helping the officer understand any of the characteristics that you may exhibit, or behaviors that you may exhibit. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. Answer the officer's questions. The officer may ask you some questions about where you're going, or why you were speeding, if you were speeding, or did you know that you didn't stop for that stop sign, or did you know you have a tail light out, whatever, or a headlight out, whatever the case may be. Just answer the officer's questions. And then don't leave the traffic stop until the officer tells you it's safe to do so. And we'll talk about that in just a minute here too. So a lot can be going on at the time of a traffic stop. as Shelley mentioned, we all feel anxious when we see those red and blue lights pull up behind us, or hear the siren of a police car. Even I feel nervous if that happens. So everybody feels that way. Now, some of these patrol cars have an awful lot of lights on them. There's lights that are flashing and popping and just doing all kinds of stuff, and that may affect your sensory issue. It may feel a little overwhelming, and at nighttime, officers may use even more lights to again illuminate the traffic stop, illuminate the interior of your vehicle, for their safety. So if this creates a sensory issue for you, we ask that you politely ask the officer, if at all possible, to use less lights. There's some vehicles where we have control over that, and there's some vehicles where we don't. So depending on the type of patrol vehicle that the officer is operating, he or she may be able to adjust the lights a little bit to help minimize any sensory issues for you. The lights are there again for safety. So it's to let other travelers on the road know that a traffic stop's being conducted, and that they are to avoid traveling in this lane, so that neither you nor the officer gets hurt. So the lights are important, but the officer may be able to control them a little bit for you. Bottom line is that the officers do want to help you, and this is where you're sharing your diagnosis, if you're comfortable, becomes helpful. If the officer understands that you have some sensory issues, then they will be happy to accommodate you to the extent that they can.
And Mo, I just want to say one real quick thing, because you brought up a good point.
Sure.
Like, you're letting the officer know about your disability, and that's super helpful because we may not know that you have a disability. You're advocating for yourself, but not only are you advocating for yourself, you could be potentially advocating for somebody else that has a similar disability to you. So down the road, you may be helping an officer to help somebody else that may not be able to advocate like you. So it's a really cool thing that not only just by sharing are you helping yourself, but you could also help somebody else.
Excellent point. So when you've pulled over safely, once the officer has stopped you, the officer will approach your car, and we ask that you roll the window all the way down for the officer to talk to you. Again, with traffic going by, and depending on the area that you're in, it can be hard to hear. So having your window rolled all the way down helps you hear the officer and helps the officer be able to hear you. The officer may approach from the passenger side of the car instead of the driver's side of the car sometimes, depending on how much traffic there is. So you see where this officer is positioned in this picture. If you can imagine a car traveling in the travel lane that he's standing close to, he puts himself at some risk. So he may approach on the passenger side of the car just for his own safety. So don't be surprised if that's how the officer approaches you. The other thing is, if you've driven past a traffic stop before, you may have seen more than one patrol car involved in that traffic stop. This happens for a couple reasons. One, again, traffic stops are the #1 way in which police officers are injured or killed in the line of duty, and we take them very seriously. So you may have more than one officer who participates in the traffic stop simply for officer safety purposes. And officer safety often translates to driver safety. So for your safety as well. The other reason is that we don't all know how to be a police officer when we join the police force. It takes training. So we may have a new officer who's recently joined the police force and needs to be trained on how to conduct traffic stops. So you may see an officer in training join the traffic stop. But by and large, it's not at all uncommon to see more than one patrol car involved in the traffic stop. It does not mean that you're in trouble or anything like that. It's just all about safety.
And I'd want to touch on one real quick thing too. If you have multiple passengers in your vehicle, chances are you may get more than one patrol officer or patrol car that responds, because there's more people in the car. So we will have more officers there to assist with the traffic stop in case something were to go wrong.
That is true. So this is something that Shelley mentioned. This is something that is on your visor card as the first instruction. And again, that's to keep your hands visible. So we don't want you reaching around, moving around in the car in any sort of busy sort of way, because that makes an officer a little bit suspicious. Again, we do traffic stops all the time. And unfortunately, some of the drivers that we stop are involved in some sort of criminal activity. And the movements that they conduct, criminals might conduct, might be to hide some evidence or something like that. And so, or a weapon. So we don't want to misinterpret that in your case. So we want to keep your hands visible at all times, so that the officer doesn't think that you're reaching for a weapon, hiding any evidence, or anything like that. Simply wait for the officer to approach your car, introduce themselves, explain the purpose of the traffic stop, and ask for your ID or other documents before you go reaching for anything. It's also a good idea just to say, hey, officer, my driver's license is in my wallet or in my purse. Is it okay if I reach for that now? Yeah, the officer will probably say yes, but please do so slowly. Same thing with your vehicle registration or insurance information. We're going to give you something to contain all of that in, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But you could say that my vehicle registration and insurance information is in the glove box. Is it okay if I reach for that now? So talking to the officer during this traffic stop is really helpful. It helps you and it helps them. The other thing is that again, because police officers conduct traffic stops all the time, we say the same things over and over and over again. And for us, we're just used to it. But for you, the driver, who may have never been stopped by the police before for any reason, again, you may not hear what the officer has instructed you. It's really important that you understand what's being asked of you, so that what your actions are consistent with that. So anything that you don't understand, just ask, and the officer will do their best to politely explain to you what it is that they're asking. So again, back to disclosing your diagnosis. This information really, again, helps the officer not misinterpret any of the characteristics that you may display and mistake those characteristics for any sort of non-compliance with what the officer has asked. For instance, you may have some difficulty making eye contact with someone when you're speaking or otherwise. And officers typically expect eye contact. So if your diagnosis makes that uncomfortable for you, which is completely understandable, if the officer isn't aware of your diagnosis, they may start to think a little suspiciously about your lack of eye contact. So they might start to wonder, had you been drinking? Are you a drunk driver who doesn't want to look at the officer because you're afraid that they might see some redness in your eyes or something like that drunk drivers often have? So the other thing, again, we come back to your sensory issues. If there's anything behaviorally that you need to do for self-soothing, which we'll talk about in a second, or other behaviors or other sensory issues that needs that you may have, sharing your diagnosis helps the officer put all of this in context and help you. Bottom line is the officer wants to help you. We just need to have good communication between the two of us in order to do that. And this card, this disclosure card, helps inform the officer how they can best help you. But again, this is something that is your choice, something that we want you comfortable with, but it does minimize any chance of misinterpretation of any behaviors or needs that you may have. And by all means, tell the officer any calming strategies that you need to use, self-soothing strategies that you need to use. Let the officer know that, and that way the officer will understand everything that's happening. Because quite frankly, just like Tara had said earlier, by disclosing, you're helping the officer in future traffic stops as I said, we get officers who are new and in training or have just come off of training, and they may have never stopped anyone with a diagnosis before. So this may be new to them. So anything that you can share with them is helpful.
And I do want to point out that a disclosure card is included in the traffic stop kit that we have available.
So the other thing that we ask is that you be polite, that, look, most of us aren't too happy when we get pulled over. Nobody really wants that to happen to them. But at the same time, if it's happening, it may be happening for some reason that you're unaware of. Like if you had a brake light out or a tail light out, you may not see that. And the officer's just trying to be helpful. So we ask that you just be polite in exchange, in any exchange when you're talking with the officer. The one thing we don't want you to do is argue. Arguing is not going to help the situation at all. And again, if there's something that you don't understand, try not to get frustrated by that. Just ask, and it's okay for the officer to have to repeat themselves or whatever the case may be, in an effort to try to help everybody get through this with as little discomfort as possible. But we do have moments where the discomfort kind of gets the best of us. And so there are instances where you may feel a bit of a crisis meltdown. You may feel that this stress or other stress or all stresses combined are a bit overwhelming. You may have some sensory overload from the lights or the siren. In any case, you may feel the meltdown sort of coming on. This too is where sharing your diagnosis is helpful. It immediately lets the officer know and understand why it is that you're feeling the way that you're feeling. So that's really important for the officer to try to be able to help you and to let them know that you're feeling particularly stressed or overloaded at the moment. And it's okay to say to the officer, I have a diagnosis, explain whatever that is, and I need a minute or two to calm myself down if that's okay. And again, usually an officer will be happy to allow you that time to do whatever it is you need to do to try to calm down. If there's any way that the officer can help you, say so. Again, I come back to the maybe adjusting the lights or asking the officer to talk to you in a calm voice. Anything like this that you can share with the officer to help them help you, again, will make this go a lot more smooth than it otherwise could. So one of the things we've talked about the visor card that you're going to receive. We've talked about the disclosure card that we're going to receive. In a minute, we're going to talk about the envelope that you're going to receive. But the police officer is going to ask you for your documents, your driver's license, your vehicle registration, and your insurance card. And when the officer receives them from you, they're going to go back to their car and they're going to put some information into their computer, the computer that they have in their patrol car, and check some information. They're going to make sure that your driver's license is valid. They're going to make sure that your vehicle registration is also valid and up to date. And they're going to check and make sure that the vehicle you're driving is properly insured. And they're going to check you. So all things considered, and by check you, I mean they're going to run your name through that computer as well, just to make sure that, like I said, sometimes we stop people who are involved in criminal activity. Sometimes we stop people who have open arrest warrants and things like that. So we run names in our computers all the time for that reason. And all of this takes a little bit of time. So this will require some patience on your part. Once you give the officer your documents, they could be back in their patrol car for a little bit while they're running this information. And again, if you have any questions or need anything At this time, it's best just to put your hand outside the window and wave until they look up, see that you have a need for them to come back to your vehicle. Do not get out of your car just to ask a question. Stay in your car unless the officer tells you or asks you to get out. And this is the envelope. So this envelope is helpful for both you and the police officer. This portion of the envelope is for your vehicle registration and your insurance card and your disclosure card, all to be kept somewhere where you can access it fairly easily. We keep all those documents together to make it easy for you to have everything ready should the police pull you over, or even should you become involved in a traffic accident. That this is all information you would need at that time as well. So having it all contained in this envelope is helpful. And it helps prevent you from having to look in different places for these different documents. When the officer asks for these documents, you can hand the officer the envelope and explain to the officer that this envelope is intended to help them as well as you, and that your documents are contained inside. The back of the envelope, which is what you see here, has instructions for the officer. Just like your visor card has instructions for you, this envelope instructs the officer how they can help you. So by asking the officer to speak calmly, to use clear, simple words and sentences, to give one instruction at a time, to allow the officer, to ask the officer to allow the driver some time to process any questions, requests, or instructions, to reduce any noise or lights if possible, and to allow the driver to fidget, rock, or flap, or do whatever calming or soothing techniques are helpful to them. And if the driver appears visibly upset, to consider calling the driver's emergency contact. So this envelope helps the officer recognize again that you have a diagnosis and some rather simple ways in which they can help you right off the bat.
And real quick, I want to jump in, Mo, because it's a great envelope. I'm so happy that Pathfinders for Autism came up with this.
Yeah.
Do not be caught off guard if an officer asks you to take your registration or insurance card out of the envelope. Sometimes officers don't want to, take any kind of envelope or packaging, so they may ask you to take the stuff out. But you can, again, show them the envelope and explain why you want them to look at it.
Yep. So we've shared with you a lot of information so far, and we don't expect you to commit all of this to memory, but in an effort to try to help you remember some of these instructions and some of these tips, you'll also be provided as part of this kit with this article, which has a lot of what we've already discussed here today there for you to refer to at a few, in the future as you need to, as you need a reminder. So as I mentioned before, the traffic stop can take a little bit of time, usually no less than 10 minutes, sometimes a little more. Sometimes the computers in our car are really working wonderfully and everything happens quickly. But sometimes, just like at home when the internet goes down or whatever, we can have some delays in getting the information back that we need. So we could be in our vehicle for a little bit. Again, we ask you to stay in your car, wait patiently. And if there's anything that you need, stick your hand out the window, wait for the officer to come and see what it is that you need. But otherwise, just wait until the officer comes back with your information, and they will, to tell you what's going to happen next and what to do next. So usually at this point, when the officer comes back to your vehicle, they'll be letting you know whether or not you're going to get a verbal warning, a written warning, or be issued a traffic citation. And usually that will conclude the traffic stop. So we ask that you don't leave the traffic stop until the officer tells you that it's okay to leave. wait. Once the officer says you're free to go, and that's usually what they say, then just wait in your car for the officer to get safely back in his or her patrol car, and then check your mirrors, put your turn signal on, and pull safely back into the roadway. If you have any concern about whether or not it's okay to leave, ask the officer before they walk back to their patrol car, is it okay if I leave now? And the officer will confirm, yep, or nope, I need you to just wait here a couple more minutes, whatever the officer tells you, but that will answer your question. The other thing is sometimes re-entering the roadway can be a little challenging. This particular road that you're stopped on could, again, be very busy, and it's hard for the driver to just pull out into a busy traffic lane. So it's also perfectly acceptable for you to ask the officer if they could stop traffic for you to pull into the travel lane safely. And we're happy to do that for you whenever that's requested. The officer may even do it automatically if they recognize that it's unsafe for you to try to do this on your own. So that too is just another question or another request you can make of the officer that's all about safety.
And real quick, Moet, because you brought up a good point about how it can be hard to pull back into traffic, especially if you're along a busy roadway.
Yep.
And you made really good points with checking your mirrors and using your signal. But don't forget that our mirrors don't always catch everything. So
Yep.
Sometimes you may have to look around the door and the pillar, checking your blind spot. And I always say check 1, check 2, check 3 times. You want to be 100% certain nothing's there. And when traffic's going by pretty quick, you want to check multiple times because somebody can pop up just like that.
Great points. Thank you. Okay, so sometimes when you get stopped, there's other people in the car besides you. You could have your friends in the car, and again, with a taillight out or speeding or running a stop sign, all of these things that happen, you may get pulled over. And we want you to understand that the same rules apply to the passengers in your vehicle that apply to you. Now, not everybody in the car may be asked for identification, but all the other rules apply. We want to make sure that everybody in the vehicle keeps their hands plainly visible for the police officers who may be involved in that traffic stop. So you'll have your steering wheel and you can put your hands on top of the steering wheel. Obviously, the rest of the people in your car, if you have front and back seat passengers, they're not going to have a steering wheel. So they could put their hands right on their lap, where again they're just plainly visible. They could kind of just keep their hands up here where they're in plain sight. All that matters to the police officers is that they can see everybody's hands, and that helps diminish the officer's safety concerns. And there are times where the other people in your car may be asked for identification or may be asked questions. And again, same rules apply to them as applies to you, meaning that we want them to remain calm. We want them to ask any questions if there's anything that they don't understand. We want them to share any diagnosis that they may have if they have one. And we want them to let the officer know or communicate to the officer any needs that they may have. Again, police officers want these traffic stops to go as smoothly as possible in all circumstances. And the only way that we can do that is clear lines of communication between you, others in the car, and the police officers involved.
And I know sometimes if you're sitting in the passenger seat, you may feel that it's helpful if you go ahead and when the officer pulls the car over, you may think, well, you're helping the driver if you go into the glove box to start looking for the registration or the insurance information. But again, to emphasize that everyone in the car needs to keep their hands visible and not be looking in consoles or the glove box.
Excellent point.
So what happens if you are issued a ticket or a citation?
So the police officer, when they reapproach your vehicle, will explain to you again what it is that they're going to do. And in this case, you would be issued either a warning, a written warning, or a traffic citation. The written warning is just simply that. It explains to you that the officer is warning you for whatever traffic moving violation has occurred. You know, again, if you ran a stop sign or were speeding, the officer is issuing you a written warning that simply asks you to be aware of your safe driving habits in the future. There's nothing that you need to do. There's no more, it doesn't ask any additional follow-up from you. It's simply a warning. So just take it for what it is. The other thing that you might receive is a safety equipment repair order. If you have a traffic light, a brake light or a tail light out or a headlight out or some other part of your vehicle operating equipment that's not operating properly, you could receive a safety equipment repair order. That does ask you to do some things to get the issue repaired. If you have a brake light out, have the brake light fixed, and then have that citation, that safety equipment repair order signed off on, and the instructions are there for you to do so. And that's what's important in whatever documentation you receive, except for the warning, whether it's a traffic citation or a safety equipment repair order, they will have instructions on them for you. The officer will tell you what it is you need to do. They will give you the verbal instructions, but a lot's going on at the time of a traffic stop, and we don't expect everybody to remember those instructions. So the instructions are on the document that you receive for you to refer to and to follow in the future. If you have any questions or don't understand those instructions, then just seek out the guidance or assistance from someone else. That could be a friend, a coworker, that could be another police officer. We're happy to stop and talk to you at any time. Anybody who you know that could help guide you with the instructions, then do that. Now, some of the traffic tickets vary in what they require of you, or what options that you have. Depending on how serious the traffic violation is, you may have what's called a must appear traffic citation, or receive a must appear notice. And what that means is that you have no choice. You have to follow those instructions to a T. And again, anything that's unclear, ask the officer. Anything that's unclear, seek guidance from somebody else to help you. But a must appear is important, and you have to follow that. Otherwise, the other options, they're also important, but they're not quite so important, in that there's no time. The must appear has a timeline associated with it. You have to show up within a certain time frame. The other stuff has a looser time frame to it. So you could pay a fine. That's one option. Simply pay the ticket, whatever the fine is associated with the ticket. Say it's $65, and you just decide, look, I did what the officer said I did. I'm just going to pay the fine. So you can do that, follow the instructions on how to pursue that option. If paying the fine is difficult, then you can request a payment plan and follow the instructions or seek guidance on how to pursue that. Similarly, you can request a hearing, or you can request a trial, and the instructions are on the traffic citation for how you go about doing that. Any part of that you don't understand, seek guidance and just get the assistance you need to pursue any of these options that may be required of you. So the move over law. Again, I told you safety was going to be a common thread here, and the move over law is solely about safety. As I mentioned, traffic stops are the number one way in which police officers are injured or killed in the line of duty. And unfortunately, this applies to other road workers as well. So ambulance drivers and medics, fire trucks and firemen, utility vehicles and highway maintenance vehicles and workers on the side of the road are all at risk because of passing traffic and distracted driving and drunk driving and people just but poor driving habits, all of the above put all of us at risk. So the move over law is intended to try to keep anybody who has to work on the roadways safe. It requires the driver who, like I said, you may drive and see a traffic stop happening on the side of the roadway. It requires you then to pull over one lane to give room for that officer and or driver to conduct their traffic stop safely. So it's intended to create a safety zone for any of these workers who are on the roadways or highways. So it asks that you move over one lane, as you see indicated here in the diagram. However, it's not always safe to do so. Again, you'd signal, you'd check your mirror, you'd look over your shoulder, you would do this only when it's safe to do so. But what if it's not safe to do so? We don't want to put you at risk because of this law. So the other thing that this law allows, as you see here in the diagram, is for you to slow down. So if you can't pull over, which is what is preferred, then we ask that you slow down and make a deliberate effort to slow down so that, again, the officers can see that you recognize the safety hazard and you're trying to do your best to respect that safety hazard. So don't panic, just do your best to either move over or slow down around any construction zone, construction workers, utility vehicles, police officers, fire trucks, or ambulance that you see pulled over on the side of the road.
Okay, so we mentioned the traffic stop kits, which are the envelope, the visor card, 2 visor clips, the article, and the disclosure card. If you're interested in receiving a traffic stop kit, please email me at smclaughlin@pfamd.org. And make sure that you provide me with your name and your mailing address. If you have any questions and you would like to address one of the officers, this is the best way to reach them, through their email. Laurie, Tara, Brian, Mo, do you have any last comments or suggestions that you'd like to include?
I don't have any additional comments or suggestions other than to just thank everybody who participated in this, to thank Pathfinders for Autism for their hard work and dedication to this program, and that, again, this is intended to help everybody stay safe and make a traffic stop as stressless as possible. And as you started this presentation, doing this before you're ever stopped by the police is helpful, and we hope that this is helpful for you.
All right, well, thank you so much, everyone.